The declining birth rates have nothing to do with women not wanting to be moms. It's about men. It's literally about men. I mean, some women don't want to be moms. I'm one of them. I'm child free. I always will be, and it's the best decision of my life. But I swear to God, it is not even about that. It is about men. It's about men. That's the bigger part of the discussion. And all these things, like all these new things, like Russia, y'all, and like JD Vance is like, we want babies. They all are obsessed with babies and the declining birth rates. But what none of these countries will deal with is the fact that men suck. They are not doing what they need to be doing, and women are tired of it. All men fail on some level because they all benefit from men not doing anything. You didn't beat your kid, yay! Oh, you fed her. Oh my God, you're such a good dad. When I was a nanny, one of the dads the parents that I worked for, where the dad was like, it's fascinating. Every time I go on vacation or do anything, and I'm literally parenting my children along with my wife, and women are looking at me afar and they're like, wow, good job. And the thing is that most men will take that and be like, look at me. The same way all men benefit from the violence of men. All men benefit from the violence, the extreme violence of men. You know what? You good men out there, y'all benefit from all these inchmails. That's why you don't want to fix the problem, because you look amazing by comparison. The same way white people who are an ally, as if that's a noun, not a verb, and if it's self-appointed somehow, are good ones because what? We're not doing other things horrific? No, the oppressive group benefits from the worst, most violent people in that group. All the other people, by comparison, look amazing, right? So if you really want to deal with this failing birth rate crisis, men have to change. That's it. Sure, it benefits when you provide health care and blah, 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 maternity leave. That stuff helps mothers. But we'll just be single moms. And as someone who was raised by a single mom, that was the biggest gift my dad ever did was leave us. Thank you, Dad. You literally by doing that, I was raised by a mom who centered her children and herself. Not some king baby who constantly needs her attention and energy and blah, and just literally takes everything. Here's the thing, men are trying. A lot of men are trying, and they're doing something. I know those men. I'm married to one of those men. And don't ever get too comfortable. Because there's always more to do. And it's that indoctrination of that entitlement and that privilege of coming from the group of people that has the power, is that you're not really motivated to do much until someone holds your feet to the fire. So I want to tie some stuff together. There's a few articles that I've read recently that I'm like, so many women end up being trad wives, not by choice, but because the men in their life won't do more. And the men are so defensive that they, like, the emotional labor it requires for women to call men out on their crap is exhausting. It's exhausting. And so if you ever want to be married to a man, the first thing you should look for is his ability to self-reflect, his ability to take criticism well and actually do something, and it's not, instead of being like yeah and change for like a month and then go right back to stuff. And then at the same time, once you bring children into the equation, all that could go out the window. There's so many of my mutuals talk about it all the time. They had the most equal marriage until kids entered. And then all the patriarchy started coming out in all these places. And even if you don't have kids, patriarchy will show up in your marriage or if you are married to or dating, because don't think you can avoid all this by just dating. Then you're going to get all the, if you live with them and you don't have the legal protection of marriage, sometimes you're screwing yourself even more. Not that I'm ever a proponent of get married, but like the idea that you could somehow avoid all this by just not getting married. I mean, great. I know a lot of women that did not work out well for them. They lost so much more. Then at the end of the day, if men who do not have the willingness to change, the desire to do the work to change, and knowing that anytime they get a little too comfortable, they're probably not doing something they should be, nothing's going to change. That entitlement is so deep that it's not just going to go away. This takes long, consistent, hard work. So I'm going to show you some examples right now of what this looks like, how it creeps into marriages where even women who are like, who I hear this so much. I've been hearing this for so long. And for the longest time, I was like, oh my God, I was surprised to hear some of my friends tell me stories about the men who would do, I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, it's crazy. What is this? How can they literally just not think they need to do any of this? Well, they weren't raised to think that way, right? So literally the amount of emotional labor that men need to do constantly in order to keep up and us not hate you, it's big. But that's the only way this is going to change. And if you don't change, we are tapping out. We'll go on without you. A lot of women, one of my best friends just had her child by herself on purpose from a donor because she realized that the last thing she wants to do is co-parent with a bum. Or, you know what I mean? She doesn't want to parent two people. She wants to parent one. And so few men offer anything but another person that is like you have to take care of. She's thriving. Again, I was raised by a single mom. A lot of my friends were too. I know single moms. And those women are usually doing so much better than married moms. I have exceptions to those rules in my life too. I have friends who are married to men who are doing the work, but it doesn't come easy. And it requires a lot of work on both their parts to make sure that patriarchy isn't showing up in their marriage every day and exploiting her. Now, before I keep going, I'm Melanie. I'm a journalist, storyteller, and all kinds of things. Please join my Patreon if you want me to keep doing this. That's literally what's paying my bills at the moment because the algorithms are not reliable for income. And ChatGPT has destroyed most writers' careers. So he's gone over there, and I had a live last night with Evan the bioethicist. It was amazing. It's like travel content, personal stories. It's all over there. Please join if you can afford. And if you can't, there's a free tier. So let's just talk about what some of these countries are trying to do because they're obsessed with women having children, but they will not deal with the main problem, which is men. And we can't make men deal with this. All we can do is tap out and wait for y'all to be motivated to change. The thing is that men can't survive without us. So eventually they're going to have to change or die. Those are the choices. So thank you, Melinda, for sending this to me. Russia institutes a schmegs ministry and offer freebies for couples to reproduce children. Okay, this story is horrifying. It made me think of but all the reasons that they're getting it wrong. They're getting it wrong. And they're trying to force women to have kids. Women are like, but this isn't the problem. So the birth rate is rapidly declining in many countries around the world. And I think 2.2 is what you need for like to replace yourself or whatever. And they're all going, yeah, right. But this is what Russia wants to do. They want people to have to turn off the internet at 10 o'clock at night. Lights off, right? So you can get to work making these babies. They want to pay mothers who stay home. They want to like reward women who quit their jobs and stay home to have kids because all these countries want these trad wives back. They also want to offer to cover hotel expenses for your wedding night and pay bills for your first date. Imagine that the money that they could do to actually support mothers, single mothers, or just mothers, literally mothers. But they're like, no, we have to. This isn't even about children, y'all. This is about men. Because why are they paying for your first date? Why don't they pay you to have a child on your own as a single mom? They will not, they don't care about children unless men are involved in that because they know that roping men in means that the men are taken care of. That's what that's about. They definitely don't want single mom because at the end of the day, they want to make sure men are taken care of and women are dependent on men. Why do you think they want these women to quit their job? They also want to ban child-free lifestyle stuff like it's propaganda. I wouldn't be surprised if they start to try to do that in the U.S., honestly. Putin wants 8 children or more. Now, let's like put aside the fact that having a child is like the most dangerous thing one of the most dangerous things a woman can do. It is some form of trauma to the body a lot of times, most of the time. It changes her life forever and her body forever. And if she's in the United States especially, and she's a black woman, she's like 3 to 6 times more likely to die because of institutionalized and systemic and personal racism and anti-blackness especially of the nurses and the doctors in the hospitals. And then all these other factors that are rooted in racism. And also, whenever they're talking about these birth rates, we know a lot of times it's their obsession with white babies. Because I promise you, over here in France, they want white people having kids. They won't say it out loud. That's what they want. What's interesting is this article really says a lot, y'all. Now, I just want to point out that the whole trad wife, the language, I think it's just to get our attention. But trad wife it's really a myth. So if you're following any trad wife accounts, please stop. You are literally giving money to people who are peddling propaganda that's also leads to white supremacy culture. Like the pipeline is direct. And it's usually from like Mormons who are rich. So this is a really well-written piece by Olga Kazan. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right. She starts off her story talking about how her kid had a fever. And how the story kind of starts off showing how when a child gets sick, it always falls on the mom, even with the most hands-on good dad. And if you don't follow one of my mutuals page, she talks about this a lot, about how the schools and just the system itself in the United States is not set up so that parents can even survive, because they constantly have to take days off from work anytime there is a school something or other. The kids get sick, and it almost always punishes the mom the most. So then she talks about how, the doctor was like, yeah, one of y'all, like it kept getting worse. They had to go to urgent care, and they're like, oh crap, okay, so one of us is gonna have to miss work. And how all this was really impacting her job and what she had to do. So then she talks about fair play. And that's what this whole article is really, it's not criticizing fair play, but it is talking about how fair play is not going to save necessarily. I really appreciate fair play. It's doing life-changing, couple-changing, parent-changing work. But this does show that even with all these tools, at the end of the day, patriarchy is going to patriarchy. And a lot of women are going to still end up suffering a lot. And it's because of one thing alone. Their husbands. Because before they even had this child, they had discussed fair play. And if you don't know what fair play is, it's downstairs. I'm not going to grab but it is basically that you divvy up chores. It really discusses, it gives language to things like, the mental load and how so many tasks, even if men are supposed to do the actual task, women are doing everything before it and after it. Like we are still like, and as one of my friends once said, and they've been dealing with this in their marriage for a long time, and there's always more to have to deal with, is she realized one day that every single thing, every task that happens in that household, she is somehow tied into against her will, because the men won't follow through, or they won't even see that it needs to be done. And that the fair play talks about how they need to be doing the noticing it, anticipating it, planning it, and then executing the thing to make sure it happens, and then the follow-up, and then all that stuff. And men, because they have so little experience doing it, and more importantly, so little interest in doing it or learning how to do it, it's still going to fall on women unless it is men seriously want to change. If you're a man following me and you are not constantly asking yourself, how can I unburden the women in my life of extra labor, then you are failing. Because I promise you, women are doing labor you're not aware of, and you just get to not be aware of. The same way white people have to constantly ask ourselves and do that emotional labor of like, hold on, like pausing and reflecting constantly how I might be burdening somebody with all my privilege of whiteness. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you're really triggered by me saying that, don't go off in my comments or you're going to get blocked. Just stick around. I talk about this a lot. Here's the important part. Her husband was assigned researching the backup child kit for whenever their son was inevitably sick and could not attend daycare, right? So they had daycare, and he had the task, he had the card from Fair Play that was his job, was to make sure they had backup child kit. And this may shock nobody. The thing is that he never did that research. Oopsie. Before people have kids, they don't realize that parenting is like running a complex military operation in addition to holding down your regular job. Yeah. So why do you think women don't want to do that? Because no one wants to run a military operation in addition to a full-time job with someone incompetent or who is competent but refuses to be a good teammate, who refuses to look out for your mental health, your emotional well-being, your physical well-being, because all they do is look out for themselves or expect you to take care of them. That's not a good teammate. Women don't want to run all this with bad soldiers, because here he because men, they just think that they know more than women for some reason. I don't know, indoctrination under patriarchy. He figured we wouldn't need a backup care. And because I was tired and pregnant in swamps, and I with millions of other tasks, I didn't do the research for him. So here we found ourselves. And let me tell you something, when women say that we can't count on men, that men are unreliable, therefore we don't trust them, they get all triggered. Like, what do you mean you don't trust me? I would die for you. I've never la. And it's like, because of this right here. This right here. Your entitlement and your hubris and you know-it-allism makes you think that things that you are told that you need to do aren't really that important. Then when you end up in this situation, which creates a whole crisis and we're pissed, then you're like, what? And then instead of facing that, you go into the shame spiral, and then that becomes women's problem. Which is why when Rich asked me 4 days into Evan's fever, as we were syringing Tylenol into him, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I very reasonably responded, I don't know. What the fuck are we going to do? And this is the perfect response, right? And then men will be like, what? Why are you so mad? Because we saw this coming, right? We don't want, well, some of us do. I don't want to be like, I fucking told you so. But you do want to say that when you're like, you know it's going to happen. And then men don't listen to you because they think they know more. Which is why I talk about men in the outdoors all the time. Do not get a male guide unless he seems humble. Confident but humble. Because this is what he's going to do with your life. Oh, I know. I know what I'm doing, even though I have no idea how to take care of anybody. I'm somehow going to take care of you in the wilderness where you could die. Right. So this is a pretty bold article. You know, I've done what pop feminist chore management gurus suggested. And look, I get there's a lot of women who are like, fair play doesn't work. And I would argue fair play does work. The problem is men. But I'm going to show you at the end of this article why a lot of women are just like, whatever, we'll get there. So now that we have language for this, now that we have ways to help educate men and try to do it without shaming them, being like, look, we know that you just don't know this stuff, right? We know you don't know this stuff, but it's your job to learn this stuff because we are dying here. Men think that any willingness to deal with it, anything at all, is better than all those other men. So therefore, they're good men. Where they're constantly comparing themselves to the men who are doing less rather than comparing themselves to men who are doing more. And part of that is because there's so few examples of men doing more. And then when you do see examples, you're like, sometimes realize that those men are pandering to women and making a living off of building a platform off of being a male feminist or stuff like that. You know what I mean? So like, what? Anyway, I get it. There's not a lot of good role models out there for you. And I understand that as a white person too. I'm like, man, yeah, what? I mean, and I'm not going to idolize anybody. One of the things once I realized, you know what? I like Jane Fonda's approach to things. She uses her power for good. She does a lot of stuff behind the scenes she doesn't get credit for. The only reason we know is because somebody said she did it. Stuff like that. When I started being like, okay, I got to look for examples of people who are doing a lot because I could easily get real comfortable with doing nothing, but because I'm not maybe actively causing harm, I'm a good person. You know what I mean? I almost feel like it is an advantage being a white woman. I mean, obviously it is because of all the privileges, but I can see all of the ways that whiteness benefits me, and I don't even see all of it. But when I understand how it's easy to go into like, well, I'm doing all this stuff, what else? And then realizing, oh my God, like that's what men do to us. Well, I'm not this. So I don't know what it must be like for men to realize that in terms of, for cishet white men especially, that in terms of gender and in terms of their skin color, like the world is just so much easier for them, right? Even like men who are like, don't have money. And for them to, I don't know what it's like, just be like, wow. I can see how they get really not motivated. So being in a place of being both an oppressor and oppressed, at least I can constantly be like, oh my God, this is what they're doing to us. This is what we do to them. Like just really kind of seeing these parallels, right? But the thing is that with men, if y'all are gonna die alone. So get on board, because we're getting sick of this crap. And also, it's liberating for you, because you know on some level you're exploited. You just don't want to face the shame of it. So she talks about fair play, about how it's about ownership and accountability for tasks. The only slight hiccup in this plan is if your husband doesn't do the task, the system falls apart. And that right there is why fair play doesn't work for a lot of women. So then she gets to the main point of this whole essay, is that the problem with fair play, and even, Eve Rodsky would say, is men. If it doesn't work, it's because of men. That doesn't mean that sometimes women that we don't fall into still doing too much, or we avoid hard conversation. Doesn't mean that we never have a part in it, but it usually comes down to men just not. They just don't. They don't want to. And maybe only do their tasks if you become a big old bird. And this sentence right here: our husbands or male partners, enlightened though they may be, don't notice what needs to be done, or they forget to do it, or they don't know how to do it. And then at the heart of that is in the entitlement behind that, and not constantly questioning, should I be doing something else? She seems to be doing a lot. What could I be doing? Because the first thing that most men are going to go to is their free time and their hobby, which is why I talk about hobbies all the time, and how that is how men will financially abuse women constantly. All this spare time to just fork off in their hobbies or their games on their phone doing nonsense. And women have not been conditioned to do that. In fact, we've been conditioned the opposite. And then the more oppressed you are in the intersections of being a woman, the even more so. The less privilege you have, the less likely that you're ever even going to think, maybe I should rest. This requires that women act as project managers, reminding their husband of literally everything. So she talks about how Rodsky says that it should, even though things may not be quite 50-50, it should feel equitable. And that Rodsky says that the men should take on at least 21 cards. Just because they take on 21 cards doesn't mean they're actually going to do all of it. So in fair play, each person is to take complete ownership of their cards. That includes the conception, planning, and execution of it. That person is supposed to remember that it's their time to do that, and that nobody should be tasked with reminding them of that. And of course, there's the whole thing about people that have different definitions of what clean is, if it have different standards. But guess what? Most men have lower standards. Not all men. Not all men. It's funny because my standard of cleanliness and my husband's is very different, but he pays more attention to certain things that I'm just like, what? I don't notice that. And I, for instance, hate clutter. Like, I hate things, but he's more detail oriented than I. So it works out well. But have you ever been to a bachelor pad? Have you been the way men will just live in filth. Their coffee table full of the most disgusting group of things imaginable, and they just walk right by it, which is why they hate being single, because they either want a girlfriend, or sometimes I remember one of my guy friends thought he was so feminist. And I was like, well, what did you do when you were single? And he was like, well, I had a lot of girlfriends. They always cook. I was like, y'all, the way these men will have any woman do stuff for them, other than maybe someone they pay to do. Single, childless women tend to do more housework than single, childless men. So before we bring a partner or kids into it, women tend to take care of their homes more. So they run into this in the marriages of like the minimum standard of care is oftentimes out of the gate just different, right? And yet women are supposed to just like go down to men's level or just do way more stuff, because men don't care as much. They don't care about living in filth or having stained covered pillows, if they even bother to have pillows. It's amazing how few pillows men's beds will have when they're single. And of course, she says that left unresolved mostly is what to do if you can't agree on the minimum standard of care, other than to constantly check in, which, doesn't sound very romantic. I am telling y'all, if you are going to date men, cishet men, or marry them, you are going to have to deal with patriarchy a lot. You're going to have to teach about patriarchy, whether you want to or not, because you have been living it. You know more about it. You probably even took women's studies classes or read some books on it at some point. So you just know more. Even the most evolved man is not going to come into your marriage unless his mother raised him this way, and his father are not going to come into a relationship and just do fight the patriarchy within it. And what I mean by patriarchy is the call inside the home, the call in his brain that's like, oh, I just don't have to do anything now. That lack of initiative. I'm telling you, I feel like if the unemployed man is the most dangerous man out there, because not only does he not have a job he has to do, he also does even less at home. Whereas most unemployed women, how many classes do they take? What all did they do? They probably did a lot. This thing of like, oh, just don't have to do anything is so ingrained in men, even the most progressive one. And it's going to come up a lot. Then she gives some backstory about Rodsky's story and how even though like despite being like very successful in her career, still became the she-fault parent. Because she did all this stuff and then her husband was still like, did you get the blueberries? Even though like she's still doing all this stuff. It's so insulting. And then they're like, what? So she talks about how in her life, her husband is still just not much more than a helper. Even when they do all this stuff, do the card, a lot of them still end up not being much more than a helper. So that's what Rodsky came to. And then she even said that when Rodsky was writing this book, what she consistently found is that men have to be nagged. Rodsky writes, but when pressed in interviews, they admit that they wait for their wives to tell them what to do. And therein lies the problem. They call you a nag. They resent you for telling them what to do, and yet at the same time, purposely wait for you to tell them what to do. And in Fair Play, Rodsky also cites a study showing that after couples who claim to be egalitarian, and I'm telling you, Laura Danger talks about this, that darn chat on TikTok. Paige talks about so many of the amazing women that I follow who are married and have children and who have been turning the wheel the other way in their marriage. They talk about this. They're like, look, what Paige said, did a video recently. She says, I would have said with my full chest, that me and my husband are equal in our marriage. And then as soon as they had a child, everything changed. And they both defaulted into the patriarchy. And now they have to work so hard to turn it back the other way. I'm telling you, even the most feminist woman will tend to default into, I've caught myself, I've talked about this a lot. And then I'm constantly like, wait, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And I wasn't even raised watching a woman do that. My mom did not do that for my dad. My dad left before I had a memory. So I wasn't watching a woman doing that. And still, through all the movies I've seen, through all of the socialization in school and in society and everything, I still am like, oh, and I default into, and I'm like, whoa, what robot? What's robot doing? So if you ever have this thought, wouldn't be me. Okay. I also said that about abusive relationships, and then I almost got, and what? Don't have famous last words, wouldn't be me. Because as soon as these couples had a baby, men cut back on the amount of housework that they do by 5 hours a week. As soon as they had a child, cut back. Just the moment they should be doing more, cut back. And in part because women on average see their incomes cut in half after having children. They've done studies on how women score higher on two facets of consciousness, personality trait, orderliness and dutifulness. In other words, in layman's terms, this means that women like things neater than men do on average, and they pay more attention to the rules and structures of a home life. She talks about how when she told her mom about fair play, her mom says, that's dog nonsense. Men don't know what to do with kids, especially your man. And here's the thing. There is some truth to that, and yet it can be learned. Okay, I'm really not into bioessentialism over here, especially because I have seen men in my life be more. My husband is more nurturing than I am. Okay, he's like the nurturing one, and I'm the like workhorse. Like I'm the Sagittarius who's like go blah, 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 right? I'm having to learn how to be more caring and nurturing. I've been working on this before I even met him. I realized like that's not my strong suit. So you will never convince me that men can't be this way, which is why feminists are oftentimes love men more than non-feminists, because non-feminists will be like, whatever, they're just this way, they just suck. You will never convince me of that. I've seen it with my own two eyes, how amazing men can be, but they have to work at it. And many of them don't want to, can't be bothered, and then wonder why we're not marrying them and why the birth rate crisis is happening. She talks about all these ways that she tried to implement fair play, But pregnancy alone made that so hard because all these factors come in that women end up doing. She spent so much time looking for a stroller. I would argue that, for instance, fair play doesn't, what about immigration? There should be a whole separate book for international couples. And it's usually the woman who has to learn a whole new language, has to deal with visa paperwork, has to deal with immigration lawyers, has to deal with all this stuff of like carrying her culture into the family, making sure that kid, you know what I mean? That's all. There's like a whole new deck of cards for that. So you can't quite gamify this stuff. At the end of the day, if men are not aware of this stuff and don't care to be aware and do something, it ain't gonna work. So she talks about how it was just really hard to implement fair play because she just got so distracted and overwhelmed with being pregnant. And that's kind of the main thesis of this, is that especially if women have young children, fair play can be very hard because if the man is not super motivated, she's going to be too overwhelmed to implement it or hold him accountable because she's just exhausted. So I'm not saying that fair play doesn't work. I know plenty of women that this is actually working, but it sounds like it's not working for her because of her husband. To name just a few of 10,000 examples, like she is calling out her husband hardcore in this. Rich was in charge of cleaning the floors, but he forgot. Unless I asked again, that he's not playing fair play. We hired a cleaning lady. He forgot to pay the cleaning lady. Oh my God. The cleaning lady texted me to ask about getting paid. Of course she did. I would task him with taking Evan to the doctor's appointment, which I had made, and he forgot the diaper bag. Mentally, I willed Evan to have a huge blowout in the waiting room just to teach him a lesson. You know, women are like, please let natural consequence make him finally learn. Imagine wishing that your son would his pants in the office in public just to teach your husband, who is like a child rather than a partner, a lesson about parenting. Do you know what I mean? Do you know how twisted this to like wish something to happen? Like, but that's the role that women end up finding themselves in. She does admit perhaps these are personal foibles specific to me and my husband, you know, and I'm not blaming her for not holding him accountable. But I will also say that as somebody who really has a long history of codependency or enabling of men, it really has took me a lot of practice to learn how to comfortably do it, confidently do it, and consistently do it. Because my defaults, because of my upbringing or just my relationship with my own father and then just all my indoctrination and whatever, like trauma, blah, whatever. My default is always to enable men. And now I've come out of that. But that doesn't mean that it's not just there under the surface, that I don't have to constantly be looking for that. She also points out if you don't live near family or, you know, a close friend, you're kind of doomed to fail on some level. She gives the example of how, like, let's say you're holding the dinner card, but then you really can't do it. And that Rodsky would say that you're supposed to, in that case, get someone from your village to do it. But she says, I, like so many other moms, don't have a village. And I would argue that a lot of times women who are married to men don't have a village because of the men. Because the men are maybe exploiting all the spare time. The men are constantly centering themselves. So the women don't have the time and energy and opportunity to create their village. I'm not saying that it's all men's fault, but what I am saying is that a lot of times it all comes back to labor. A labor issue. In all systems of oppression, the exploitation of labor, time, and, you know, hoarding money and resources. She talked about how her parents live a flight away and Rich's parents are dead. We have no other family nearby and we have to drive an hour to see most of our friends. So often I'm assigning Rich a task, even if it's technically my job, because I'm literally holding a crying baby and no one else is available to help. So then she apparently was like asking Rodsky about, and on the call, Rodsky said, maybe think about your neighbors or someone in your village that's not necessarily a friend, and how Rodsky's own mother had relied on neighbors and stuff like that when she was a girl. But I don't know my neighbors or my local shopkeepers well enough to do this. So I would say that I don't like to just be like, it's all men's fault and they got to change. I like to focus on what we can change. If you realize you don't know your neighbor and you don't have community, you have to start working on that. And I know it's also hard to do if a man is exploiting your labor. But I was raised by a single mom, and you know what my mom made us do? Every time someone moved in the neighborhood, we together would make a fudge pie and go over to those neighbors' house, and she would talk to them for a couple hours. Now, did she really? Is this like a Southern hospitality thing? Maybe. But no neighbors ever did that to us. You know why she did that? She was a single mom. And she knew that she needed all those neighbors to be looking out for us, for our safety. She knew that she needed to be able to rely on letting us go to a neighbor's house if she couldn't come home. If we were sick, she knew she needed these neighbors to know us because she couldn't do it alone. I learned so much from watching my mom be very good at networking and making sure that she built a village through doing all of this stuff. So I know it's weird. A lot of people don't know their neighbors now, but you know what? I learned a lot from my mom about being like putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, and making that first step because usually someone else is not going to make that first. But the only way women are going to get through any of this stuff is community, because men consistently fall short. And the more isolated you are in a relationship with a man, the worse off you are, the more exhausted you're going to be. Look at this. I mean, God, y'all, her husband looks so bad in this article. Rich and I have also struggled with the minimum standard of care. At one point, Rich tried to convince me that the floors don't actually need mopping. I can't believe it. She put her husband on blast like this. They can just be dirty. So she's really criticizing Rodsky in a lot of this. But I think some of this comes down to what Rodsky's book can't do is make men give a crap, you know? So Rodsky suggests in situations like this that you collaborate on what's reasonable within your, ultimately reverting to the reasonable person's standard of all this. But the problem with that and many others is there's no judge or jury. We are the prosecutor and the defense attorney, and there's no verdict. How do you convince a man who doesn't care about dirty floor that he's being unreasonable and that you don't want to put up with that? She also points out that a study on fair play at the University of Southern Carolina has found that the system did work, at least among couples who actually applied it. And there lies the problem. She's with a husband who doesn't seem to want to apply it. She says they had all this success with it, but here's the deal. Only about a quarter of the participants actually completed the Fair Play program. And I bet a lot of women could attest to it. A lot of women tried this and it simply didn't work because the lack of willingness of men and women being too tired to make them do it. And then also she says that a lot of times people are too overwhelmed with parenting and domestic labor that didn't have the time for divvying out all this crap. And yet I would argue, okay, but without a system in place, these men are not going to do it. And we know that domestic labor is a huge reason that a lot of women end up initiating divorce. But we don't really have a lot of solutions. So either you go it alone or you try to use the tools that we have. But at the end of the day, it falls on men wanting to do it and women holding them accountable for doing it. If they won't do it, what are you supposed to do? Because what ends up happening is a lot of times it causes a lot of conflict because women end up doing so much emotional labor. I had Rose on one of my lives, which you can see on my Patreon, and this was such an amazing interview about emotional labor. And that's the thing, is that fair play requires women to do an enormous amount of emotional labor to implement it. Because men get in their feelings and they get into their shame and their guilt if they get called out for not doing what they said they're going to do, or for making women nag them to do the things that they won't do unless they're nagged. So she said, I asked Rodsky what to do if the partner just doesn't do his card, which is the issue that me and my husband keep running into. Rodsky told me that this can mean that the partner who does do their cards has poor boundaries, and says, maybe they haven't done the internal work to understand what boundaries mean. What are they willing to accept? And that Rodsky says that for her, setting a boundary means telling her husband, I am not willing to live like this anymore, which on some level is basically threatening divorce, maybe without actually using the word. And here is what her conclusion is. But I am willing to live this way. I'm not getting divorced because there is too much work to do. Right now, a helper is worse than a co-pilot, but it's better than nothing. And well, when we're not screaming at each other about Clorox wipes, we do actually like each other. And this is the conundrum a lot of women are in. They love these men. They don't want to divorce them. They don't want to break up the family. They don't want to have to deal with the financial impact of a divorce, the emotional toll of what's gonna happen to their kids. You know what I mean? This is a valid thing. I don't want to divorce my husband. It's better than nothing. This is so heartbreaking when women realize the men that they love so much just don't care. And yet the women are so exhausted, especially with young children, that they figure, well, it's better than nothing. I would argue that in some cases, no man, even with his money and help, is better than the labor and exhaustion that comes from parenting two children instead of the one. And that a lot of times women need to ask themselves in the deep work to understand why a hypothetical husband or a real one who sucks wasn't doing his fair share. And at the end of the day, it's because he doesn't love you enough. Here's the kicker. What this forces a lot of women to do is to have to ask that question they may not want to know the answer to. Do you love me enough to stop exploiting me? Do you love me enough to not center your shame and your feelings in order to deal with this thing that makes me want to leave you? And the reason why I bring this up, so I'm a writing coach. I haven't done it as much since I've started doing YouTube and TikTok, but I might need to get back into because I miss it, but also like a form of additional income. All the algorithms do their thing. So one of my students wrote this for Insight. This is by Jules Thies, and this was a beautiful story. And the reason why I loved it so much is because a C-section forced her to stop. She was bedridden. Well, I think this was like her third child. She had a C-section and was bedridden, and she tried to do stuff and literally couldn't. I think she died, almost died twice in labor, and literally died once and was brought back to life during her mini pregnancy. And she got to the point out of no other choice because of her health, where she basically was ready to divorce, was good, just like her mom had, because she was like, I am done. And she had to have that hard conversation, and many hard conversations being like, if this doesn't change, I'm leaving you. And the thing about asking that is the heartbreak of hearing something that you can't unhear, even if it's not said out loud, but shown through actions, is that they don't. It worked out well for Jules. Things changed dramatically over a period of time. Nothing's going to change overnight. And now they're thriving. And there's a lot of couples that I know that are like this, but it took a woman hitting her bottom, her absolute bottom, and realizing, if I bring this to the table and he doesn't do it, and I literally threaten divorce, am I willing to do that? Am I that's a very hard question to ask. You'd rather not know than know the truth. And the truth is that a lot of these men don't love you enough to do this work. This is very hard work. This is decades of indoctrination and entitlement and laziness that they have to let go of and work hard at undoing. It's a lot of work. And if they love you enough and don't want to lose you, they'll do it. Not going to be easy, but they'll do it. But a lot of men don't. And that is heartbreaking. That is devastating. And they'd rather not know than ask that question. That's not always the case, but that is a lot what's happening with a lot of this. Let me know if you want a part 2, because I really want to go into this article. This is actually the article that inspired me to pitch to Harper's Bazaar, which is how I went to write my super viral article. This went super viral. This was the first time I realized, oh my God, I am so glad I'm not married or have children with these men. And it went viral because it was so relatable. Women are not nags, they're just fed up. And yet, at the end of the day, women are realizing that men make them become nags, and that they are going to have to do a lot of work to turn this thing the other way. And unfortunately, only men who love you enough will do that work. So you can give all the incentives that you want. You can pay for dates. You can, turn the internet off at 10 o'clock. Or you can be JD Vance and man, we want well, we know you want babies. But until you work on men and pressure men to change, and also give women a lot more financial security and support so that they can have children without these men, or at least not be forced in a situation where they're having to do all this crap, the birth rates are going to keep going down. And now what they're doing in the US is exactly what they are doing in Russia and all these other countries, where they're like, okay, we tried to play nice. Now we're going to force you to have babies. So be careful out there. Make sure that you have tons of birth control. Make sure you have stockpiled stuff. Make sure you do whatever you can, because they want us to have children at any cost. And it's not about the children. It's because they want women to take care of men. That's it. They don't care about children. None of their policies reflect that. They want women tied to men and men to be taken care of, because the men are the moms are their wives' children in so many of these households. And women are tired of parenting grown-ass men. Anyway, let me know if you want a breakdown of that other article, which I might tie into my own article. Let me know what you think. I've seen fair play work for a lot of couples, and I've also seen it not work at all. And fair play's not the only one out there. But if you're going to marry or date a man, you have to deal with patriarchy. You have to talk about it. You have to unpack it, because you're both going to bring it into the relationship. I don't care how feminist you are. It's in you. It's in him and it's in you. So whether you know it or not, you are signing up for that. Patriarchy 101 deconstruction right out of the gate. And if that man doesn't love the crap out of you, he will not do that work. Anyway, let me know what you think, and let me know if you heard the comment song. Hey everybody, it's the comment song. Things I took pictures of. This is a baked potato dessert. It's all ice cream in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey everybody, it's the comment song. Hamburger thing in Argentina. I just thought it was cute and funny, so I took a picture like I always do. Join my Patreon, cause I have endless travel content. This was in New York City. They're like, hey, yo, don't steal our books. Where's the weed at? Where's the weed at? That was in Taos, New Mexico. Comment song if you're new. Here's me just doing something crazy at the end. So you type a comment. Monkey, monkey, monkey. This was in Lyon and it's funny. And this is, I don't remember where. Italy, I think maybe LA. I don't know. I take funny things, post pictures of things that make me laugh. This was near my old house in LA. Look at those doors. It's I forget what you call this thing. Shrek. Taking a break in Hollywood. I thought this was really touching and funny and cute and kind of sad. Anyway, let me know if you heard that comment song. And follow my Patreon. Et voila.